I'm 28 years old. I published my first book last year. It's called When They Tell You to Be Good. It charts my political coming of age, my travels, my organizing. One of the biggest questions I get as a 28-year-old is, aren't you too young to write a memoir? I always push against that. And I think that's one of the reasons I want to make this series. I think memoir can seem like such a big and daunting thing, and in a lot of ways it is, but I also believe that so many people have stories to tell, so many marginalized people have stories to tell, people from different backgrounds, young people like myself, and it's so important to kind of unpack and debunk the different parts. So I really want this series to be a variety of ways for you to explore and understand the different ways that you can dive into memoir. And to start, I feel like it's important to talk about the different reasons why someone might want to write a memoir or what might compel you to do it. The first reason that I have is that you understand the importance of sharing your life experience. Memoir is defined as a genre where you usually pick a certain theme or chapter of your life and you explore the lessons and things and experiences that happened during that period of time. It's so important to understand where we are in the world and how we fit into the world and how we feel about how we fit into the world. And memoir is one of those genres where you can unpack that. And I think for me, I was in college and I got deeply radicalized by the Black Lives Matter movement. I started reading a lot more about Black history. I started understanding more about Caribbean history. And through all of these things that I was learning, I realized that there were all these gaps in what I was taught as a kid or things that I wish that I'd learned. And I was really compelled to really want to know more about the world and to go out into the world and to seek justice and liberation and to organize. And this led me to places like living in Seattle and being a boycott organizer. It led me to working in Montana, to traveling to South Asia, to going to Europe, falling in love there. And all of these were such drastic and wild and interesting experiences. And I kept thinking back to all of the memoirs and Black Power texts that I'd read. And I realized that I hadn't read a single book that kind of encapsulated all the different things that I had experienced and that I think my younger self would have wanted out of a book. To me, that thought process just means if it's not out there, you should maybe make it. I knew writing my book that there were so many things that I wanted to include or talk about that I felt like I really hadn't read before. I hadn't read a book about someone Black who was from a Jamaican American culture, who was queer, who was an anarchist, radical, traveling, thinking critically about masculinity. And I wanted to put all of these things in the same text and especially do it from a young perspective, because so much of the political memoir that I've read is people that are older, kind of talking about their younger years. But what does it mean to be an organizer and a writer and a Black person in your 20s, writing about those things while you're in your 20s. And so I saw the importance through that lens of writing my own experience. And I think memoir can be really powerful because it shows you both the specificity of what you've been through and also the universality of the things that you've experienced. So the first one is definitely understanding the importance of your life and the experiences that you had is one of the first reasons why I think you should maybe write a memoir. Second one, big one, is that you want to understand more about your family, cultural, ethnic history. This is big because memoir is such an amazing way for you to tell the story of your family or tell the story of your neighborhood or you and your siblings or whoever the characters are. Just because you've grown up in a culture or a background doesn't mean that you understand everything. And so in my case, I knew that I wanted to write about my family's history. I knew I wanted to write about Jamaica's history, but there was a lot of stuff that I didn't really know. And so I started researching. I started watching documentaries about Jamaican history, about Jamaican independence, about folklore. I bought a few books by Michael Manley, who was one of the first prime ministers in Jamaica post-independence. I started listening to more Jamaican music and taking movies and really doing a deep dive into my cultural history. And I think doing this gave me such a deep appreciation for, one, not only my family's journey, some of the things that I experienced and went through growing up, but it also taught me that I have my own perspective and lens on history, and that lens is important. So when I was learning about rude boy culture and gangs in Jamaica, I was also relating that to my experiences being a Black American and seeing the ways that men and Black men congregate and treat each other and operate in urban spaces in the inner city. And I saw correlations that I don't think otherwise I would have really drawn together. So in understanding my cultural history, I got to kind of expand what my narrative was going to be. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my family. It wasn't just about the things that I went through, but it became more about what are the social systems at play that have affected my life and how does that show up on a historical level. Also, history is simply a story that that we tell ourselves. For me to be a subject of that history and also to be retelling it, I'm contributing to this kind of larger project, which is owning your history, looking at it, defining it for yourself, and having the courage to do that on a written scale is so important. And I think especially when you're from a marginalized background, I mean, I've been researching this a lot lately. For Black people in the US, we were brought here, and some of the earliest slave narratives were fictional. They were written by white people, and it was to push for the abolitionary cause. And so even on that level, I think about how the act of writing is such an important way for us to reach back and to have a connection with the past. I don't think time is as linear as we think it is. And so the process of writing about your life also gives you access to ancestors in a way that I think maybe religion or spirituality or these other processes that we have that relate us to the past don't necessarily do. Understanding your cultural history can definitely be one of the biggest reasons why you might want to write a memoir. Ooh, a squirrel. Another reason, which is kind of related to the last reason, is you want to contribute to the archive. There are so many people with so many backgrounds where your family or your personal or your cultural history might not be as included in the archive, or it might not be updated in a way that is justifiable to what it deserves to be. And to me, the archive is generally this notion that there are so many cultures and aspects of culture that are erased. And so as a human being today, if I contribute and I write about my life and my experiences, that can be a document for future generations to look back on and understand the movements that I wrote about, the places that I traveled to, the particular context of the time that I live in and that I was able to express in the written form. And so the archive to me is so important because it's really a way of defending what future generations could potentially have to learn from. And yes, fascism is always a thing. Book bannings are even more of a thing now, which is why I think the archive is even more important. And it's important to document our lives and histories in numerous ways. I mean, I don't think memoir just has to be written. I think sometimes if you want to do a documentary series or you want to interview family or you simply want to document things for yourself so you can have for the future, whether it's family recipes or clothes of people that you live with, having a connection to the archive and sort of aggregating these things that show us what our lives are, I think it is a gift to future generations. And the importance of the archive outside of this normative white supremacist sort of institutional archive. I believe people can have archives, friends can have archives, family can have archives. Okay, this next reason is something that I really centered on when I was writing my memoir, that there is something or a series of things in your life that you need to work through that you haven't really had the chance to. I knew I wanted to process some of the grief around my biological father's death. I think losing someone at a very early age and not being given the tools to really process it or be able to explore the curiosities that I had, it always kind of left a mark or a shadow over me. I mean, some of the other things I really wanted to unpack were my experiences as a Black person traveling to other countries and experiencing anti-Blackness. I also wanted to unpack and kind of debunk this part of my organizing life where I felt like I'd read so much Black Power literature and I'd learned so much from these texts, but I also saw the ways that these organizers and people kind of mythologize themselves. And some of these are things that in the past, people were part of movements and they were doing it for years and years. And I think on some level, if you're going to organize against the state or towards a liberatory cause, you do have to push the image of that movement and be really precise about how you talk about it in a forward-facing way. But I think especially with a lot of men in movement spaces that I was reading about, I really wanted to turn away in my own work from this sort of hyper-masculine, revolutionary, who isn't afraid of anything, emotions don't show up on the page. And I wanted to speak towards trauma of organizing and being in spaces where you're confronting the state. And I also have said this a lot in interviews, but I wanted to speak to the emotional side of activism. What would compel someone like me to be so angry about a social issue that I would go out and join Standing Rock or go to a protest or speak at a rally? And I think understanding the emotional reality of why I've done the work that I've done in a written space is so important to me. From afar, so many people can say like, oh, I admire you for the work that you do and it's so important. It's also hard when you go home at night and you're alone and you just have yourself, none of those people that were proud of you can be there to save you then or to help you process what you've been through. Memoir can be really healing because it allows you to ask questions that maybe you wouldn't ask otherwise. And even if you don't find the answers, I think the prospect of trying to understand ourselves and trying to understand how we work through things and to give ourselves time and space to do that. And because a book is such a long process, I think it's such a beautiful way for us to know ourselves and also to be honest about things that are difficult for us to be honest about. Working through difficult experiences is one of the biggest reasons that you might want to write a memoir. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous wasn't a memoir, but Ocean Vuong wrote that, and it was kind of inspired by his life. And in that text, he's working through his very complicated relationship with his mother, who was working through a lot of trauma and PTSD growing up. One of my other favorite memoirs, Heavy by Kiese Layman, is about Kiese contending with the laws of Black masculinity, contending with his relationship with his mother, about how he came of age. Another great memoir that I love is Boy Erased. And that's about that author contending with really damaging parts of growing up in a conservative religious family, coming out, and then being sent to conversion therapy. All of these were examples of books that I read that helped me in some way confront and realize, like, oh, I have the capacity to write through these things, and I want to because I deserve to. And the last reason you might want to write a memoir is that you really respect the notion of writing about life and the world. But I do think there's something really special about looking at the world around you and figuring out the 1 or the 5 or the 10 different ways that you can write about a single event. The act of writing about our lives doesn't necessarily mean that what we're writing is the most precise emotional version of what we're trying to get at. And so I think emotional variation is something really important in memoir. And I think having a respect for the complexity of the ways that we feel and how that can show up on the page is really, really so important. Please comment below with reasons why you might be writing your own personal narrative or reasons that are different than the ones in this video about why a person would want to write a memoir. And let me know what other kind of videos you'd want to see in this series, because I definitely have a lot of other ideas, but I always want to hear what you're interested in. But until next time, happy writing.